I'm Cindy Milstein, and the other two can say their names if they want. And this room is a lovely prefigurative educational moment, so it's like awful. I may end up repeating sort of some of what Chris, or maybe hopefully dovetailing, because I have a hard time talking about, I was going to look at maybe some examples of prefiguration in North America coming through sort of anarchist or anti-authoritarian milieu, scene, movement, whatever term you want to use to describe it. But I have a hard time doing that without describing what I mean by prefiguration. So I'm going to may overlap a little bit. So at the risk of repeating, for me, prefiguration is about finding seemingly impossible possibilities in the present that point toward and actively experiment with the potentiality for a transformed future. So kind of rooting out what's in the now that may point beyond. And I think that demands that we do a bunch of things simultaneously when we do prefiguration, and they sort of all, for me, need to happen at the same time. One is we need to know what it is we want to prefigure. And that seems self-evident, but most people can't actually describe anything remotely about the world that they think they want to see beyond the state, beyond capitalism, beyond forms of racism or homophobia. So coming up with a reconstructive vision of new forms of social relations, and I actually want to take a little issue with Chris. I also think the second thing we need to do is come up with new forms of social organization. It's not enough just to transform social relationships, that we also have to have spaces where that actually happens, and forms where we get to decide things, and places we have power. And the two, I think, are completely connected with each other. So for me, I come from the anarchist tradition, and I think that a vision, some of my reconstructive vision would be about not just meeting needs, but meeting our desires at the same time. Not just liberating ourselves from things, but figuring out how we want to free ourselves to shape the world in imaginative, beautiful ways. I really love the parts of anarchism that talk about the word self and then hyphenate it before almost everything. So self-governance, self-management, self-determination, where we would combine mutual aid and voluntary association and critical solidarity. And the world I want to see, in broad terms, is striving as much as possible for forms of non-hierarchical social relationships and social organization, or directly democratic, egalitarian, caring, and loving social relationships and respectful. So that's part of my reconstructive vision, and it doesn't have to be yours. But if you don't know where you're going, how do you even know what you're stepping toward? How do you prefigure it? And I think we don't do a good job of that. So my first suggestion and one thing I think is actually lovely in a lot of the anarchist milieu, is that people spend a lot of time sort of kind of sitting around talking about kind of the world they want to see. And that's really important, to take space to do that. We were talking before this panel began about how there's, not to critique the forum, but how there's almost, this is one of the few things of this is actually talking about, okay, what actually do we want as opposed to what don't we like? And it's a lot easier for us to what we don't like. And who's going to join a social movement when all we do is complain and say what we don't like? We have to offer something better, I think. Okay, so interconnected with a reconstructive vision in my prefiguration idea is that we have to draw out and practice the things we want to do now, even if they're partial glimpses that we might still want to do later. Prefiguration can't say, okay, we'll do this now, but we don't actually want that to be part of our better society. I was at a talk last week about prefiguration, and someone suggested shutting down computer corporations by hacking in, or shutting down some corporations, I'm using the wrong example, shutting down corporations by hacking into their systems. And I was like, would we want to shut each other's projects down? Would we want to hack into each other's and shut each other down? That's not a prefigurative practice. I mean, not to, and it's so hard for us to think about what we like now about how we relate to each other. And with that, I think we have to come up with practices and ideas that also point beyond the present, that give people an understanding of what more we could expect from the world. Okay. And to do that, and this, Chris had mentioned this, I think we have to do prefigurative practices that completely make us kind of feel in tension with the present, that explicitly expose the things we don't like, that create a dissonance and make us feel uncomfortable, get other people to feel uncomfortable, and also provide living examples of the joy and beauty and vision of the world we want to live in. So I'm part of this anarchist volunteer collective space in Montpelier, Black Sheep Books, and I love when we're right downtown. We're at the main intersection in our tiny little town, very, very visible. Everyone knows, oh, there's the anarchist bookstore. But we're very open and friendly. We don't even look like an anarchist bookstore, not to diss anarchist bookstores, but oftentimes they look like someone's living room or dark or clubhouse, and we're very careful not to do that. And people always come in and they're like, oh, there's so many bookstores here. It's nice you have a business. And I love going, but we're not a business. Why would, and I like, we don't get paid. We're all volunteer. We decide everything together. And people almost always go, why would you do this if you're not paid? And that's such, I love that. And then they get kind of uncomfortable. Like, why would people spend their time doing what they perceive as a business? Sure, of course it's embedded in capitalist social relationships. We're not anti-capitalist as a project. We are in that tension with capitalism. But we decide things differently. We have different social relationships with each other. This is going to be one of my examples, so I'll use it now. And we do it because we want to create an educational space, a social space, a community center, a political project. We want to create a different space in a community where there aren't places to be, where people can just talk and debate and bring different ideas. So last week when we did an event, some high school kids came who had never heard of anything radical just because they liked the topic. 3 military guys came, 2 of whom are about to join the CIA, and a bunch of anarchists, and I was so proud, because of like, this is what I want to do, is create spaces for dialogue where people feel comfortable in social spaces, prefiguring, hopefully changing their minds because they're listening to other people's opinions, but where you have dialogue. That prefigurative world I want to see. All right, so the other part of what I understand, besides reconstructive vision, drawing out our practices in the world now that we want to see in the future, and pointing beyond the present with this tension, is, lastly, that prefiguration is by and large a process, and it will always be a process. We're never going to reach the society we think, the revolution. We're not going to jump over a barricade and there will be the better world. That it is completely about how we structure social relationships and social organization as processes that we recognize. The means and ends have to relate to each other, but there's never any end. And that's, on the one hand, you can say, oh my goodness, that's exhausting. We're going to be spending the rest of eternity of generations trying to make the better world. But I think it's beautiful because in a way, we're always coming up with new barriers and new things we can, wow, we could make that better. We could make that less hierarchical. We could make that more joyful. How would we do that? Better approximations of the great transformation that we want to see in society. So I want to quote 2 things and how much? Okay. Sorry if I'm speaking too quickly because I speak very fast and I will try to slow down. I want to just quote 2 things that I liked about sort of prefiguration, and then I'll talk about sort of a couple limitations and some examples. One is from autonomist Marxist Harry Cleaver, commenting on anarcho-communist Peter Kropotkin. How many hyphenated political ideologies can we get? And he talked about Peter Kropotkin's method of sort of finding prefiguration. I love this as a methodology. That Kropotkin had to seek out and identify at every level, from the local workshop and industry to the global organization of the economy, signs of the forces of cooperation and mutual aid working at cross purposes to the capitalist tendencies to divide us all against each other. I love that, both seeking out these forces of cooperation and mutual aid, but always at cross purposes with the things that we don't like. I love that cross purposes phrase and mutual aid, and that to me is, we should make that clear. And I was listening to, driving down here, a lovely gift from an anarchist who does something called Riot Folk, Ryan Harvey. He's a wonderful community organizer and does nice little happy direct democracy songs. He gave me a seat. And he actually had a quote in it, which he told me later was Howard Zinn, but I like the quote, in one of his songs, which was that revolution isn't this cataclysmic moment of social change where suddenly everything is different, but, and this is how I also like to understand prefiguration, is that it's an endless succession of surprises moving zigzag toward a more decent society. And I love that. It isn't a straight line, but we're always going to kind of veer off the path and come backwards. I love that. So thank you, Howard Zinn or Ryan Harvey or whoever, whose ever quote that is. And I found the quote zigzag, so that's why I like to use it. Okay. So I'm going to move into anarchism and why I keep, for all the flaws within it, and we can have another workshop on the good and the bad and the ugly within anarchism today, but I still keep coming back to it because I think no other political tradition right now really says, let's transform the whole of life. Every aspect of life, economic, social, cultural, psychological, spiritual, sexual, political, and let's do it all. Let's make the whole of our life fully transformed. So, prefiguration needs to take place everywhere, everything we do. And so for anarchists, they really struggle with this. We might not do a good job of it. As Chris pointed out, we might do it really badly. But there's a struggle in every area of life to prefigure the world we want to see. So mostly people become anarchists and suddenly they're like, I can't do my job, I can't eat this food, I can't wear those clothing, I can't live in this household. But that is that moment of dissonance in yourself that's so important to prefigure who you want to be. I really think that's a crucial moment. That's what happened when I became an anarchist.
Same here. Yeah.
My whole life is wrong, but that's really incredible. How would you make your whole life what you want it to be? That's the beginning step. But not just for us, for everybody. I don't think that should be, again, an individual thing. That's for everybody.